You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It's August 25th, 2022 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And I wanted to talk about meaning making as an outcome of practice. It ties into the attachment approach that we have here at Mettagroup in the sense that we have these three main, how would you call them, domains, using a Shinzen word of how that goes. We have the attachment system, the exploration system, and the collaboration system. We're human beings. We live in the human form, and human beings are designed to live in complex social groups. And particularly in the West, where a lot of us have great affluence, we can moderate that, the level of social connection that we have. Some of us actually can moderate it to the point that we're mainly alone in how we operate in the world. I thought that I would touch on that process of early practice where we begin to develop basic metacognitive skills, Vipassana meditation, which is mainly the vehicle we have for that. I tend to teach a metta Vipassana, so it's an integrated hard practice and insight practice. But these basic skills that form in doing a basic Vipassana practice, so in Vipassana, V means to divide and Passana means to see clearly. So you're taking experience and beginning to pull it apart into its pieces so that you can see the pieces separately and then watch them as they come together to form experience. So with Shinzen's basic technique of see, hear, feel, we're dividing the five senses into visual experience, auditory experience, and the felt sense of the body. In Buddhist practice, we have mind, which is a sixth sense, which is not obviously incorporated into the see, hear, feel system. But what you notice about mind is that it's the thing that selects what you pay attention to. So when you come into your meditation stance and begin to pull apart just the basics of experience, you see that there's activations in your sense gates. The individual sense gates can be active at the same time or not, and that those activations then are formed into patterns of experience, which we recognize and assign meaning to, or definitions to, and then that becomes the experience of conceptual reality. If you're not used to looking at that, you can rely on the perception of conceptual reality as a reliable experience, marker of what's actually happening. And in the West, of course, that's the Aristotelian view that you take in the experience of what's out there, you create an internal working model, and then you operate from that internal working model. And that if you're sighted and you see the world, what you take in is an accurate reflection of what's actually out there. In Buddhist philosophy, we don't do that, or the description of what we do is different than that. Our mind grabs little pieces of the outside world, basically the pieces that we prefer, and that we take that highly curated selection of preferenced objects and create conceptual reality from that based on our conditioning. And then we project that outward and see the outside world as out there, even though it's a reflection of our internal experience projected. Is that making sense, that description? So as we begin to pull it apart, what we see is we have the capacity to sense objects can be sensed when there's contact, consciousness of that sensing experience arises. It's evaluated for urgency. Does it need immediate attention? Does it not matter whether we get to it? It's pleasant. Is there time to have a pleasant experience? There's a cue. The urgent stuff gets processed first, the pleasant stuff second, the stuff that doesn't matter may never be processed. Then it's compared to the perceptual database. And if there's a match in the database that's close enough to what we're experiencing in the present moment, the meaning, the historical conditioned meaning attaches to the present moment, and it flips into conceptual reality. One of the things about this is that we can easily lose track of the experience of the present moment in that and slip into the thinking process, the defining process, and then all of the limitations of the previously experienced happenings are assigned to the present moment, and we lose track of the possibilities of the present moment and inhabit only the conditioned experience. We call that samsara, or these ruts, these ways of habitually responding to the understanding of the experience that we create. If you would like, which I quite do, the quantum idea of this, in that each moment what opens is all of the possibilities that you could choose in that moment, all of them laid out, and as soon as you pick one, all of the ones except for the one you pick fall away. And then what comes in the next moment is all of the possibilities that are tied to the possibility that you chose in the moment before. We call that the knowledge of conditionality, if you follow the Mahasi map, or the second stage, to understand that the previous moment has set up the moment that we're in, and this moment sets up the next moment based on the choice that we make, so that you can find yourself arcing into a afflictive cycle, or into a beneficial cycle, depending on the choices you make. So in this basic metacognitive description, there are 6 of these. Awareness of the state of mind of self and other. So we talk about that as understanding that you have a mind state and other people have a mind state, and that they're different. Your mind state and the way that you conceive of conceptual reality is based on your conditioning, and other people's mind states and the way that they create conceptual reality is based on their conditioning. So that even though the two of you are together experiencing the same phenomena, the way that you understand it and the way that they understand it are necessarily different, because conditioning is different. The definitions of what you understand the activity of the present moment to be are different. So that you recognize that your conditioning creates a different experience than other people's conditioning, and you understand that that's the nature of the human experience, that there's not a problem with that, right? That you interpret something very different than someone else is not a problem. What it is a curiosity, and actually if you can get somebody to be open about what their experience is, and you feel safe to express openly what your experience is, it creates contrast and depth in the understanding of what's actually happening, and it's expansive in that way. The second one is that you're able to monitor the accuracy of your interpretation of what's going on. Have you ever had the experience of getting it completely wrong? The Buddha uses that story of the farmer who goes into the hut. He sees a snake in the corner, which he hacks apart, and then he lights the candle, and it's a coil of rope that he's cut up, right? So Tajapanati is the Pali word for this activity of comparing ultimate reality with conceptual reality, and it's a constant checking to make sure that the way that you're creating your experience of the present moment is actually reflective of what's happening in the present moment, and not something that's been distorted by the way that you create that experience. I liken it to a rocking back and forth, touching inside to the experience of sensing, and then looking outside to see how you've changed that experience into a representation of the world. One of the things that you can do in meditation practice, of course, is track the quality of what the sensing experience is and compare that to conceptual reality. So in visual experience, if you look at external seeing as a sensing experience, what you notice is that there's a sort of a circle space in the center of seeing where there's focus, where the imagery is sharp, and where there's sufficient detail to make out what's happening. And if you look at the sides of seeing, up above and below and to each side, what you see is there's less focus, there's less detail, it's less descriptive until it falls off altogether. But that if you're looking at as you scan the room, a room that's all detailed, all sharp, all in focus, then what you're looking at is not the sensing experience, but the mental representation of that sensing experience. So the eye has moved around the room in a Brownian motion, just grabbing pieces of information that are of interest and then assembling a solid, in focus, detailed representation of that. And can you tell the difference between when you're in the representation of things, which is created by the mind, and what the mind is sensing in order to pull that together? Awareness of one's own influence on another state or behavior and vice versa. So mindfulness of inside is mindfulness of your own. Mindfulness of outside is the mindful awareness of other people. And then mindfulness of inside and outside, this is from the Satipatthana Sutta, describes the experience of you presenting and somebody else experiencing that having an effect on them, and then them expressing that effect, and then you taking that in, and that having an effect on you, and then you expressing it, and that having an effect on them. That your presentation, your reaction, your expression has an effect on other mind states, on other people, and then their responsiveness to your to their input has an effect on your experience. In order to mentalize this well enough, you have to track a lot of experience, and you have to track it fast enough to know what's happening. You express something, and somebody responds to it in a way that's completely different than what you think you meant, and actually you interpret their expression as hurtful. In that moment, can you pull apart how that might have happened in time to adjust the responsiveness that you're going to get? Or do you simply react with a sense that they've intended to hurt you? You need to defend yourself or to strike back. So you express something which you think is communicative of what you mean, but because their definitions are different than yours, they understand it as they're defining it, not as you're intending it. And then they react to that. And then they say something to you which comes from them feeling unseen and hurt, which is hurtful, which you then take in. But if you can track fast enough that they misunderstood your communication and then attempt to investigate what they understood and to try and recommunicate what it was that you wanted them to know, that could settle that reactivity before you escalate it with another action. The fourth one is becoming aware of one state of mind in such a way that it has a regulatory effect. We call this self-generated emotion in the way that we construct it. Dan Siegel uses the term the window of tolerance for emotional intensity. So something happens in the present moment, you react to it, there's an emotional component to the reaction which exceeds the window of tolerance, and so you have an emotional event that needs to be regulated. And then how do you regulate it? So we all learn to emotionally regulate in the process of being with our caregiver. So we're an infant, we're in the arms of our caregiver, we express ourselves in an unknowing, authentic way. Our caregiver attends to us, connects to us empathetically, understands what our communication is, mirrors back to us the understanding of that communication, and then decides on how to respond to that. And if they respond to that in a way that actually is helpful to us, we have a sense of self-confidence that develops from that. I can express myself in a way to get my needs met, and the world will meet my needs, is the experience. So I have a sense of confidence in that. As that process develops in early childhood, those responses that our caregiver gives to us, which are regulating for us, which are helpful for us, we can learn to do for ourselves. And so we begin to take on an understanding of what actually is regulating and what experiences we have that can be regulated by the different skill set that we learn. And so we begin to collect these emotional regulation strategies from our caregiver. That all making sense? When we develop enough of them, we have a kind of mastery at being able to regulate ourselves, which really supports exploration. When we're dependent on a caregiver to emotionally regulate us, we all come into the world without a knowledge of emotions and without the capacity to regulate ourselves. When we interject these strategies that they use to help us regulate, then we can support our own exploration independent of a regulator. And when we develop a collaborative system of emotional regulation with a caregiver, which tends to be associated with secure functioning people, then we can really go out to the edge where meaningfulness might be found and look for it in a way that if we can't regulate, we can't go to. So that this process of becoming aware that the mind can be used as a way of emotionally regulating is essential to exploration, which is then essential to meaning making. That is to say, our exploration is of things that we find valuable, which we find meaningful, which are helpful to us as we explore. The fifth one is awareness of one's own or another's action plans or goal directedness. And here, really, what we're discovering is that our exploration, the things that we need to do to pursue meaning, are going to be different than what other people need to do. And that our pursuit of what's meaningful to us through our exploration is of value, and other people's pursuit of meaningfulness through their exploration is valuable, and that this is something that should be supported, and that's something that we should really expect the people that are close to us to provide for us, that they support our exploration and we in turn support their exploration. Which brings us to the sixth one, which is the meaning making. How do you spend your time, and do you spend enough of your time engaged in an activity that you find in the activity itself meaning? It's a big question. In Buddhism, of course, when you come into the path, what we ask of you is that you take an ethical stance in the world. And we define that with the precepts. The layperson precepts is to undertake the practice to refrain from killing, to undertake the practice to refrain from speech, harmful speech, to undertake the practice to refrain from sexual conduct that causes harm, to undertake the practice um, to not take what is freely offered. I think I switched the second and fourth. And then the fifth one is to undertake the practice to refrain from imbibing intoxicants that lead to heedlessness, I think it is. I was reading the paper this morning, and what came across was the sustainable development goals that the United Nations has put out. I don't know if you're aware of them. It's a response to global warming and response to a kind of runaway late stage capitalism, which is kind of consuming the habitability of the planet without concern for the effect that it will have on us. And what I thought was interesting about it is the way that different cultures have embraced it. For instance, part of the article said that the Japanese corporate establishment is supporting the hunting of whales as part of the environmental goals because whales eat a lot of fish. So, it really does emphasize that you can create any reality out of the sensing experience, depending on the conditioning, because I would never do that myself. I would never come up with that. Seemed like a stretch. I don't know if you know what these are. I thought that they were interesting, and we often, or at least I often, have a conversation with people about what's actually meaningful and how do you know how do I know what to do to find out what's meaningful if you don't have a sense of that. And so here we have these goals for creating a world. The first one is no poverty. The second one is zero hunger. The third one is good health and well-being. The fourth one is quality education. The fifth one is gender equality. The sixth one is clean water and sanitation. The seventh one is affordable and clean energy. The eighth is decent work and economic growth. The ninth is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. The 10th one is reduced inequalities. The 11th one is sustainable cities and communities. The 12th one is responsible consumption and production. The 13th one is climate action. The 14th one is life below the water, so that's about saving the oceans. The 15th one is life on land. 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions. And 17 is partnerships for these goals. So an organization of people working together for this. It seemed like a really good list to me. And then the idea that we have to hunt the whales to to protect life below the water is that mentalizing experience of people creating a sense of reality that matches their own conditioning. One of the things about living in the West, of course, is that we are so affluent in comparison to other parts of the world that if you don't go to other parts of the world and see how it is, it's very hard to fathom what that's like. I had wanted to go to this site, a cave in sort of northern Myanmar, which is a long drive, 7 hours into the hills, the mountains. And it was a place where the average wage was $2 a day. I don't know if you've ever been to a place where people make $2 a day. It's very basic. You meet the people, of course, and there's a sense of aliveness and a sense of happiness. And there's a sense of hard work that's necessary. Some of you may burn incense, those stick incense that are a few dollars a box. In the villages up there in Myanmar, you got $2 for 15,000 sticks of incense, which took about 12 hours to make. So the little slivers of bamboo are then coated with a kind of tamarind bark mulch and glue and rolled. And to roll that many in a day, you have to move really fast. And so with an amazing level of skill to produce that. So that's 8, decent work and economic growth, reduced inequalities of the colonial nations and the nations which were colonized. So we have the big picture, this big picture of all of us in this together and trying to create a world where each person's experience is valued and each person's need for exploration and meaning making is supported in some way. But that still beggars the question of what do we do in our own lives that then produce this sense of meaningfulness? And that actually is a question that's part of the process of exploring. I have my apple story, which I tell. 44 years ago, I got sober in AA, and I had a sponsor, and I asked him what I was going to do now because so much of what I had done before I couldn't really do anymore and have any expectation of staying sober. And he says, I don't know, you'll figure it out. What kind of apples do you like? And I said, I don't really like apples. They're hard, they're sour. He said, well, Granny Smiths are hard and sour, but there's a lot of different apples. Go to the Korean deli, buy a Granny Smith and buy one other apple, eat them both. And then the next day, go and buy the apple you like better and another apple till you've gone through all of the apples at the Korean deli, which at the time in New York, there was maybe 20, I think there were 26 varieties of apples. And I went through that process. It took about a month. And at the end of the month, I liked Gala apples. And Pink Ladies were a close second. And that was very instructive about exploration, is that you go and you have the experience of exploring, and then you evaluate the experience of exploring, and it redirects you in a new direction and a new something to explore. And most of the directions that you go in are dead ends. You try 25 apples to find the one apple that you like the best. One of the things about attachment conditioning and the way that exploration is supported, depending on what your attachment experience was, you may not be resilient in your exploration. And so you make a couple of inquiries and then they don't produce enough meaningfulness, and so it shuts down the whole process of exploring, rather than simply taking what you did find out and having it redirect you into the next one. I think there's a resilience in securely functioning people, or insecure functioning people, where there's an understanding about the nature of that produces a resilience, that if you don't find it in one direction, it eliminates that direction, and then you go in a different direction as you pursue it. So in the activity, you find a meaningful to do it, to engage in it, to discover something about the nature of self and the nature of world. Now, of course, when you turn to meditation, really the goal that you're being directed toward in the end is enlightenment. And I think that many of us come into practice with this understanding of what enlightenment is. I think Shinzen said it the best I've heard, which is most people come into the pursuit of enlightenment with an idea of what it is, and most people's idea of enlightenment is not what enlightenment is at all. But then enlightenment turns out to be much better than what it is that you imagined it would be. Kind of a paradox. It's not at all what you thought it was going to be, and it's much better than that. I remember early on in the first Vipassana class I took, the teacher went around the room and asked everybody what they were there for, and I guess completely naively said, well, I wanted to be enlightened, which created a rolling belly laugh in all of the rest of the participants in the class, as if this were an impossible goal. But that I could understand why we all would be practicing for 2.5 millennia and it not be a worthwhile or practical goal. So it just took looking around for somebody who thought it might work. It's not nearly as good as what you thought it was going to be, and it's much, much better than what you thought it was going to be. So we begin this process of exploring for that, a series of insights that we go through in order to open up to this idea of what it is actually that we're doing here. And my sense of this is that at the end of that is this sacred sense of sacredness about this human life, which I had a really hard time understanding at the beginning. When I sat with Katriana Reed, and she said that gaining enlightenment was like being a sea turtle swimming in the ocean and then just accidentally coming up to the surface inside of a life ring. The chances that it would happen were phenomenal, which I always experience as disheartening rather than encouraging. And then Shinzen said that he expected everyone there to have stream entry in this lifetime, and that actually was more encouraging. I like maps, and I use Mahasi's Progress of Insight and the Manual of Insight because it organizes your practice and orients you to look at particular insights. And then once you have the insight that it's pointing to, it leads you into the next insight. And so you see this progression of insight leading to insight, which ultimately brings you to the place of understanding. But it's not so different than the description I gave at the beginning. You take in the sensing data, you create an internal working model of the world, and you project it out. and you understand that that's your projection of the world based on your conditioning, that you're constantly in the habit of checking whether or not that representation is accurate or not. So as you practice, and there you are, abiding in this profound sense of sacredness, which is timeless. And then you drop back down into the limited identity, the sense of self, which can't comprehend any of that. When you're in that moment of sacredness, it all seems perfectly obvious. And then you drop into the sense of self, and it seems entirely bewildering. And it's this ease of back and forth. So maybe that's another definition of what enlightenment is, this movement between that and the other. Stas?
George, do you feel like the kind of the more developed part of the brain is still functioning, where, you know, because I feel like the sense of self can be diminished, but it's still kind of there, at least the way I practice.
Um, do you have you ever been around kids and the toys that they have? There's one particular kid's toy, which is it's a little cart, and it has wheels in it, and you pull it along, and there's something in there that pops, and these little balls, colored balls, pop up. Do you know what I'm talking about? That's kind of the experience I have of it. I'm this awareness, this container, and then the little activity of self pops up as a brightly colored ball for a moment and then vanishes. But it also depends on the practice you're doing, because if you're in the bond practices, that you're just moving into a sense of awareness, and so all of the phenomena is happening. And if you're doing the more Theravada practices, you're moving into a sense of no self. So there isn't really a way to track that when you're in no self. Is that making sense?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I was thinking of, you know, there's people go through extreme experiences, like the temescals is one where you do the, you know, so hot and extreme, you kind of push into a no self experience, or
Yeah, the ego collapses in the face of adversity.
yeah. But you know, there I feel like your brain is just working differently. You're just so
Right.
strange. But I feel like a lot of the retreats or spontaneous experiences, I feel like the kind of the ordinary part of the mind's still working.
Right. But you're just not in it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first few years of going into the sweat lodges, the ego would give up almost immediately, and I'd be in these wonderful states for hours. And then as my practice deepened and I got more and more equanimous with discomfort, I would just go in the sweat lodge and my ego would tenaciously hold on for the whole experience. And it actually became quite unpleasant. As I would wait round after round for the ego to collapse, and it just held on. So I also noticed that you have experiences that correspond to where you are in the development of your practice. You know what I mean? That being said, why don't we do some practice so that we can begin to have these experiences? Joan?
I was wondering, you were talking about rocking back and forth between perception of the internal experience and external. Could you give an example of how you track that?
Well, in a simple way, it would be, say, see, hear, feel, focus in, focus out.
Right.
Out is other, out is outside, and focus in is really the experience of self.
Right.
If you talk about it in terms of metacognition or mentalizing, and one of the aspects is internal versus external. The internal representation is the focus in, and the external representation is focus out.
So in a daily situation, out on the street, so to speak, is that the same process? I just notice what my experience, and then I look out and see everybody else's experience as best I can.
Yes, internal experience is self, external experience is other, but you also have to be, you have to validate your experience of that with them in some way to actually really know. Otherwise, you're really in your own experience of them. This is what I think is going on. What do you think is going on?
Right. Okay.
So it's it really is an engagement.
Okay, that makes sense. Right. Okay.
Then you get the feedback from them. You know, we can be pretty good and get in the ballpark of what's actually going on for somebody, but if we don't directly ask them and they're not open to telling us, it's very hard to know what's happening with them. One of the things that secure people do with the empathetic experience is that they have the first level, which is that responsiveness to the experience of other people's pain, physical or emotional. And then they're pretty good at reading facial expressions and body language. But urban people are good at stilling the presentation of that. So it's not, they can completely mask what that experience is. And then the third is this empathetic experience. In Buddhism, we call it compassionate empathy, where you feel in your body a facsimile of what they're feeling. If you can track that and compare it to the external presentation, we have a sense of whether somebody's lying or not. But secure people also have a fourth dimension of that, which is they compare what people say they're going to do to what they actually do, and that also has to match. And insecure people don't tend to do that comparison. They split it off in childhood because in order to preserve the good parent, because they have parents that often don't do what they say they're going to do. So that piece is also there. So if you do all four of those things, you have a sense of what the other person's experience is. You can compare that to what you mapped and then adjust. And in that adjustment, begin to learn the definitions of the other person. We do in relationships, in intimate relationships in particular, like to learn the definitions that the other person is using to define their experience so that we have a way of relating to them, way of communicating so that they understand what we mean. Is that making sense? So let's do some basic see, hear, feel practice, and then we'll do some focus in, focus out. So splitting apart the experience of what's happening, watching it come together. Any questions about that before we begin? I'll give the instructions as we go along. So go ahead and take your meditation posture. So any comments or questions about what we did? Pretty straightforward, I think, for most people. So thanks for your practice. Coming up, we have a level 2 starting in September, I think on the 6th, so about 10 days out. We have a week-long retreat at Seven Circles, October 1st to the 8th. And then, not sure what's happening with trip to Asia, but I am going to be doing a retreat in Europe in June of next year, if you happen to be traveling around. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your practice. I offer the teaching on a dana basis. Dana is the Pali word for generosity. If you want to make a donation to me or to Mettagroup, it's really appreciated. Any amount is fine. There's a link on the website to do that. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you somewhere on the path, I hope. Bye now.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, bye now.